Hey everyone, I'm Carolyn Hill, Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider. Welcome to our new chat series, Charting Changes in Legal. And I'm here with Ari Kaplan. Hi, Ari.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's great. It's great to chat with you. You'll need no introduction really, but do you want to introduce yourself?
I need no introduction. Yes, of course. I'm Ari Kaplan. I am a lawyer in the United States and an analyst that covers the legal industry.
And we're here today. So we've talked about this for a while, Ari and I, and we decided that because A, we like each other, and B, we both spend our entire life talking about changes and new trends in the legal sector. We thought we'd get together to chat through potentially a number of different topics. But today we're going to be talking about trends in legal operations. There is an awful lot to talk about in that area. So I know, Ari, so you've done a lot of research in the legal ops space. Interestingly, you talked about a report, you've done a few reports, but you talked about one of the reports that you've done very recently at Clock in May last year. You've also done hosted a few dinners, but I thought it would be really cool if we could talk, first of all, about some of the key findings of the legal ops report that you published.
Yeah, I'd be honored to do that. I have to say that over the break, I was going through some of my old newsletters, right? You have this amazing platform and for a number of years I was sending out newsletters and I was reading them, sort of the initial blurbs to my family over dinner. This is how exciting the dinner is at my house. And my teenagers were listening and just so bored. And it was amazing to me how I had been, in many ways, repeating very similar concepts over the years about the use of technology, about the willingness to take a calculated risk, just about understanding what your clients are looking for. And I kept thinking that I was repeating a lot of the same things. And how do I focus on what's next, what's new, and what's been so interesting to me to study the legal operations community and the role that folks in legal operations are in is that has been a very easy evolution to study. So I wrote an article in 2012 for the ACC docket about this new strange role that was emerging in corporations. Some people called it a chief of staff. Some people called it a chief operating officer of the legal department. And eventually it was settled that it would be kind of someone in legal operations, the director of legal operations. And that was a catch-all for everything other than law. And then there were just all these different aspects that came in. E-discovery was not initially part of that, but then of course it came in. CLM was not something people talked about back then. AI, nobody even thought of some of these things as being included. It was very much a business role, someone who could manage the business of the legal department. And so the report that I wrote is called Modern Legal Operations at the Convergence of Law and Business. And it really tries to bridge a lot of these things. And I wrote that with a company called Simplify. And I've been lucky to do several dinners over the past year, but also just convene discussions with folks. And Clock was very generous to invite me to share some of the findings. So it's just been really interesting. It's just such an interesting space because it gives you a chance to learn about and touch and be dynamic in the law as it's changing.
I remember back in those days, the days with the really big tech companies, wasn't it? And Clock seemed to come out of nowhere, right? And then suddenly, because law firms became the clients, and suddenly everybody was talking about Clock and wanting to be there. But tell me, so it is so interesting about the changing role, but it's quite a challenge, isn't it? Particularly given the current market climate. But apart from obviously the growth of the role, I think it's really interesting. You talk about e-discovery becoming a part of it now, and how there's a kind of big convergence. But were there any other key findings within the report? And so what came to the top most?
For sure. And I just want to acknowledge that it did and it didn't come out of nowhere. What was fascinating for me was that during this early period, I would think like kind of like in the early days, I was asked to host a series of panel discussions with the then kind of core leaders of legal operations. And this is back when Legal Tech had an event in San Francisco. And this group was talking, obviously led by Connie Brenton, was talking about this book club that they used to have, and they'd be at a table. And then years later, I learned that there was a similar kind of series of discussions happening in the New York area, right? So you'd have financial services and insurance companies in New York, and then you have these big technology companies and others like that in California. I used to joke that it was like Biggie and Tupac. You had these giant stars on different coasts, and they were having these conversations, and eventually there was this, a massive series of discussions. But when I wrote this particular report, we're clearly in this watershed moment, and it's amazing to see. And you meet folks at legal operations, and I've had the good fortune again of having these dinners. It's not only fun, but it's like having the brightest individuals in legal, but also who are free to be able to discuss change and driving change because they've experienced it, and they have in many ways an opportunity, a broad opportunity to create a shift. So some of the things that were very interesting in this report was that 90% of the people I spoke to said that the role has changed, it's expanded, that there are ways that they are starting to formalize and systematize the process of legal operations, because as the teams are growing, you need to be able to have someone come in, understand what's happening. Because the interesting thing that people I don't think realize is that what a legal operations leader is doing in a growing dynamic media company, and what someone is doing at an emerging biosciences company, or what they're doing in a very, very well-established financial services or insurance company or a technology company, right? They're very different. The role in legal is in many ways very responsive. If it's a really good savvy team, is very responsive to the business, and that's a key issue. The legal leaders are becoming very much aligned with the business leaders. As you know, I host a daily lunch on Zoom. I call it the virtual lunch. And yesterday we had a wonderful conversation. And one of the things that came up was that finance in a declining economic climate is aligning much more with legal, and they are collaborating to try to determine the trajectory of the organization and what strategies are going to be best. And so this sort of group of talented individuals is important. And as we've discussed, right, more than 2/3 expect their spending on CLM to increase this year. They but more than 3/4 we're talking about benefits from CLM. And again, lots of different people are moving into the legal ops space. So I mentioned e-discovery, but there are folks in data science. There are folks who are familiar with analytics. There are individuals who recognize the importance and have an understanding of where AI sits. And again, one of the things that I think is so interesting, and came out of this discussion with my family in my newsletters, is that I was often talking about technology, and we've really shifted from a discussion about technology much more to a discussion about data.
So I think we're going to come back to the tech point. It's so funny. So you talked about a few things, but so I've been a journalist since 2004, and I was having a conversation a while back with Andrew Day, who some people might be familiar with, who's within the financial services sector, who, as far as I know, was one of the first legal ops heads, and this was before most of us, I think, including me, really, cottoned or really tuned into the concept of legal ops. I mean, the role has been around within financial services for a really long time, within those sort of big leading financial institutions, as Andrew likes to remind me. But so you mentioned tech, so I think we're going to come on to CLM. It's certainly one of the areas which I'm most fascinated with, and I'd love to come on to talk a bit about Gartner's hype cycle. But I want to come to you before that, because I know you've had a lot of conversations, you've done a lot of research, you've had a lot of conversations with legal operations leaders, and I wondered what the conversations is specifically in as far as tech was concerned, what the topics of conversations were.
One of the things that was part of the report, and this is not the first report that I've done in legal operations, just the most recent, and I'm really have my fingers crossed that I'll have a successful report in 2023. And the thing that comes up a lot is, how do you measure success? How do you highlight success? What does success mean? What is the definition of success? Where does technology fit? One of the challenges that's been increasing for everyone is this idea of finding a level of talent where there is a similar level of technical proficiency. So, do I understand the technology? Can I set strategy? Can I develop a playbook that will allow us to have repeatable processes? And ultimately, sort of using data to tell stories, which is a very common discussion at some of these gatherings. And when I say gatherings, I just mean sometimes people, when I was at Clock, I was lucky to participate in several sessions, and this idea of how do we use data to tell stories? The people who are most successful end up using data to tell stories. Where are there opportunities for the legal department to get some sort of competitive advantage for their organization? Again, thinking much more holistically about the enterprise as opposed to just this little group. Or, everyone is really thinking, where do we fit as part of this team? And I think that in many ways there's a team building component to the role in legal operations that has been incredibly beneficial. Also leadership, right? So are we leading in technology? Do we understand how much technology we have, and are we using it, and who's measuring that, and who's decided on that? A lot of those things are being evaluated as we, again, sort of try to understand where the economy is, the idea of what does our technology portfolio look like, and where are the benefits, how highly utilized is that platform or are those tools, and do we need something new? If we did, where are the gaps? And I think that's really, in the end, it's really about, is there value being created? Can we increase that value? Is that value helping us drive change in a positive direction?
Yeah. So one of the things that interests me is the number of different offerings, that are springing up in terms of helping legal operations teams and what those offerings look like. So you've got, and some of the ones that appeal to me the most are helping a very holistic, right? So you've got like KPMG recently, last year, they came up with this sort of very data-driven assessment of what the legal operations offering looks like. They call it LOTS, which is something to do with transformation service, where they do surveys and they try and really unpick what the offering, how the legal operations team works, and try and gain that sort of full. But the KPMG by no means is the only one doing this. So you've got a ton of obviously organisations doing having worked for a long time in legal operations, including FTI, who I know you've worked with. But so I like this kind of holistic dive into to help them really have full visibility of what they're trying to achieve and how they're trying to achieve it, rather than just coming in with the tech piece. And I think that, but what's interesting to me is there's a number of law firms, obviously, that have, they want to help. They've seen an opportunity, no doubt, but they want to help. And it's not law firms offering legal operations advice, as you know, it's not new, right? So I think Norton Rose launched a legal operation. Norton Rose Fulbright launched a legal operations practice in 2019, led by Stephanie Harmon, who used to be at Barclays. Before that, in 2018, Baker McKenzie hired David Cambria, who I think people refer to as the godfather of legal tech. He came over from Archer Daniels. It's not something new, but so last year, Sherman, they launched legal operations by Sherman, and it kind of, that particularly got me thinking, as this is not a new area, but it's definitely a growing area. There's lots of other law firms that are offering legal operations, and it's a case of what exactly are they providing? And one of the things that really leapt out for me is that Sherman is going to be, no doubt as a value add, I say no doubt, probably as a value add, helping its clients with things like how to use technology for it. And one of the examples given was how to use Word, right? And it just made me laugh a little bit, because the idea of Sherman Stelling teaching someone how to use Word just didn't feel right to me. But I get that the interesting thing is that with the, you know, the legal team has traditionally been underserved, if that's the right way to describe it, by the corporate IT team. They've often been overlooked. And it'd be interesting to see, you know, I just feel like, is Sherman the right one to be teaching the team to use Word? And now with the legal operations heads finding their feet, really growing into their remit, is this now the time for them to go, right, what do we get from where? You know, it may be that Sherman, as a value add or whatever it might be, as part of this holistic legal operations offering, is the right place. But I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, or if it's just me sort of going off in my own little tangent.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense, and we've seen this for many, many years. You know, law firms. So I practiced law in New York City from 1997 to 2006, and since then, so a little over 16 years, right? I've been covering the space, really studying the space, and you see over this period of time when corporations are really focused on a certain area. E-discovery is a good example. Innovation is another example. Legal operations, yet a third. You see law firms creating corresponding groups so that there's a mirror, someone with a similar level of expertise or maybe a higher level of expertise who can correspond on those particular issues. So corporations were focused on e-discovery. Law firms developed all kinds of incredible talent in litigation support and e-discovery. ACEDS was born, right? There's just all of this data that shows what the trends are being supported by. And then, you know, innovation, you had these leaders in law firms now emerging just to focus on innovation, to provide greater service and more efficiency to their clients. And now legal operations. And I think Sherman is a great candidate for this because the knowledge management team there is incredibly gifted, and they are contributing to this effort, which makes perfect sense because I've also been lucky to understand and study the knowledge management team around the world at many, many firms, which obviously is well established in the UK among other countries. And so that role and that substantive experience and knowledge is sort of perfectly aligned with corresponding with legal operations. They too have this incredible freedom to drive change and to test out things. And I think that it makes perfect sense. I think it's great that law firms are responding to their clients in a way that will help them correspond better, have easier communication, better understanding. You're even seeing that level of understanding happening between legal and IT now. So that communication, you know, ambassadors between all these different spaces are emerging, which is certainly going to enhance the experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, I should say so. I wrote a fairly positive piece about that. I do like what Sherman's doing, and I agree. So they're sort of they're packaging up. So they've done a lot of the stuff that they're doing for a long time, but they're effectively packaging up to make it more accessible. I suppose exactly like what you just said. So they're mirroring, right? And they're doing knowledge management, process improvement, legal technology, business intelligence, training and development, and it makes a lot of sense. And obviously the team there. I think in my article I called them world class. I mean, so I'm sure I'm not the only one. They've got a great team, obviously led with, you know, Meredith and their legal tech team. So you know, I agree. I think that it's a great offering. I just think it'd be interesting to see how these things shape out in terms of, you know, the sort of the extent to you know, I feel like legal ops need to put their foot down, to be perfectly honest with you, and to demand more from their own IT team. But anyway, it's probably another topic for another time. But so let's talk a bit about CLM. So again, there's probably something I'll start ranting about in a minute. But so your legal operations report dived into the well-charted growth of CLM. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I mean, almost half of the people that I spoke with are bringing contract analytics and similar kind of e-discovery functions in house. The one reason why I've mentioned e-discovery a few times is because you're seeing this CLM and sort of general contracting world mirror in many ways what e-discovery went through 10, 15 years ago, right? E-discovery has been using artificial intelligence for a very long time. There's tremendous expertise there. And so now you have this new space that everyone is super excited about, that lots and lots of investment in. People are testing this. You mentioned there are a number of market leaders. And so there are lots of comparisons. So I really I'm always trying to. So I'm like the Switzerland of legal in many ways, right? I've tried to stay completely independent here, but understand as much as I possibly can. I started a podcast back in 2009. I called it an audio blog. There was no such thing really. And, so there are over 800 episodes, and I've had all of these conversations to try to showcase what's coming, what's out there, and also to just understand the full range of what's involved in the evolution of our profession. And so what's been really interesting is that 61% said that contract AI and analytics professionals are moving into legal operations. And as I said, 68% expect their spending on CLM to increase this year. I'm going to be studying this again and expect to see those numbers increase even more, because the single biggest area of investment or thinking about a lot of this was clearly in contracts, trying to figure out where things are. And I think that's part of a bigger data revolution. All of this information was created during the year or 2 years or what have you that people were at home. It's disparate. It's become a challenge, and people are trying to figure out how to harness that for some type of advantage. But before you do that, you have to centralize it. You have to understand what it is before you can figure out what to do with it. And I think it's going to be a really interesting year for this. And I also hope to try to study it a little bit. I have a report that's in its 8th year. It's called E-Discovery Unfiltered, where I privately interview law firm leaders and corporate leaders about different e-discovery companies, just to give those companies a chance to understand where there are strengths, where there are weaknesses, how they can gain an advantage, right? It's very in depth. And I think that is a really appropriate thing to do for contracts, frankly, other spaces, just so that the buyers have a better understanding and people can really dig in and make strong decisions. But clearly this is the emerging area.
So it's funny, you are the Switzerland. And I don't know what that makes me, but I like it. I like that. But so my take on CLM and some of my concerns are that it's so fast growing. CLM, so companies, I like a lot of the companies in the space. I have great relationships with them, but there's been a lot of investment in a very frothy market. There's been a lot of multiples, a lot of money being invested, and from that there's going to be pressure to sell, right? So my sort of just observations as a less Switzerland person would be that so I think that we've already observed, so from a legal ops perspective, CLM is or legal ops is about processes, about templates, about it's not just about software, right? You have to really understand what you do and how you do it, and then you have to, I'm obviously all for software, but so I feel like, so Gartner published its CLM Magic Quadrant last year, as you well know, and although there's obviously a lot of positives, one of the challenges with some of the vendors was around implementation, and there were observations about the users being perhaps I don't know that Gartner would ever use the word oversold, but there was a clear sense that they didn't either have the experience or the support to implement the CLM solutions which they had bought. And there's also clear evidence that often corporates buy more than one, sometimes many CLM solutions, and it is not a cheap or a short thing, right? So anytime that you're having to flip from CLM to CLM, something's going wrong. I think that so I think it's obviously the onus is on legal ops professionals to make sure that they're being given the time and support that they need. The onus also is on the vendors to make sure that despite the tough market conditions, that they are providing all of those things, right? Because from a reputational point of view, it's really important. And I think that, this next year is going to be a really interesting one for the CLM market, because it's going to be potentially tough, conditions. So I just think that, it'd be really interesting to see where that takes the trajectory. I'm sure that the trajectory is only up, but it'll be really interesting to see whether we see, I don't know, see how those factors playing out.
I would encourage the listeners to look at a report I wrote several years ago. I did it with Seal Software. It was about contract AI. And what was so interesting about that was that I spoke with just sort of the leaders in this in the corporate market that are on the very edge of innovation and adopting tools and really taking advantage of them and harnessing teams of talent that can apply sophisticated technology. And there was a real discussion in there about, all my research is qualitative. So I'm having these interviews with people for a very long time, and I try to convey that in the report. And there's discussion in there about where are their challenges in terms of implementation and which technology is most suitable for certain situations. And I will also maybe push back on the fact that maybe this is a challenging year for CLM. This could be an amazing year. There's a lot of money in it, and people know there's really an appetite for it. There's a need for it. And so I don't know if the economy itself, what we're hearing about the economy, what we're seeing in the financial markets, is necessarily going to dictate whether an organization decides to purchase it. There could very well be a rebalancing and decide I'm not going to put our budget toward this tool, but I don't know that we can say now. Although I love this conversation, and I'm just having so much fun with this, because it's just getting us to all think about, well, is that going to be a challenge? And if it is, what's the guide? So I'm always thinking about the practical. And that's one of the things that has come out of a lot of my conversation, because as you know, I have a new report out with FTI and Relativity that we collaborate on, focused on general counsel. And I have this great, very lucky. I say often that I do lucky work, because I get to talk to all these general counsels, have dinner with these folks. And what's so interesting is that they're trying to figure out, what does that balance look like? What does that balance look like in talent? What does that balance look like in risk management? What does that balance look like in sustainability and ESG? You have this really interesting evaluation going on. And to bring it all the way back to the beginning of our discussion, the legal operations team is kind of like the scale that helps with that balance, that tries to gauge how significant an issue is, where is the solution that kind of brings us back to center, and if something is off, they can evaluate kind of where that is. This year, that evaluation is going to really include data, and we haven't even talked on AI, so there's plenty of discussion for another session or whatever else we decide to do with this chit chat. But I'm loving this.
I think, do you know what? Perhaps that might be a good place to wrap up. I don't know. We could just think with Ari and I, we could chat all day. Yeah. I do think, this time of the market is so interesting, because we know people should be investing. I love you. You're Mr. Positivity. I'm like, well, we know that they should be investing. We know that CLM is about being much more efficient. It's about the legal department not being a block. It's about potentially handing back authority to the business, or sort of enabling the business. It's all of these things which long term could potentially save a lot of money, and also visibility over where everything is. There's so many reasons, but I suppose, yeah, I'm the cynic, and I'm just like, where, you see, obviously you're right, we don't know where the economy is going, and hopefully it won't be that, but, in a downturn, typically people stop investing in technology, which I'm hearing rumbles with law firms, more, behind the scenes, advisors are saying, yeah, they're sort of starting to pause, not stop projects, and you sort of hope that people will have the long-term foresight to realize that actually these things save money, that a lot of the progress that we've made during the pandemic and the efficiencies that have been gained would not have been gained had they not suddenly started investing in technology, because there was no choice. So it'll be so interesting to see over the next year. We've had the pandemic, we've had sort of a period where we've kind of all got back together, but then now there's a lot of focus on hybrid working, both corporate and law firms, and now we're kind of hopefully in this like more stable place, but then it'll be, obviously the economy I think will have an impact on spending. But so it'll be interesting to see where that goes, Ari. And then next time we can talk about AI and all sorts of stuff.
I can't wait. We can talk about AI. We can talk about all the different travel that's going to occur this year with any luck. And I think that these are great issues. And also, I'll be starting my dinner series again. I did 11 dinners in 2022. I can only hope to do more in 2023. And the dinners really help shape this conversation because they provide personality and flavor, and they just my objective in a lot of these things is just to create a forum in which people can be free to share ideas that will benefit them all, right? People aren't really coming. They're certainly not coming to talk to me. They're coming to see each other and to have this conversation in a space that will allow them to share ideas, which is really what we were trying to do, right? Just to give people a chance to hear, well, what are you hearing, and how can we benefit? And I hope we get to continue this. So thank you.
So you heard it, everyone. Ari just invited me to one of his dinners. So on that note, I'll just say thank you very much for the invitation. I accept, and it's been great chatting with you, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you so much. Oh, awesome. Thank you.